Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport where I don't even think I know what's going on anymore. We're in confusing times. I don't think it's just a boxing thing. I think it's a life thing. It's weird, isn't it? We're that generation that if you're my age, so if you're 35 plus, you live through so many historic moments that they'll write about and overanalyze forever and a day. The tech revolution, the manipulation of public consciousness in terms of the war in Iraq, the war on terror, etc. We got to see a black president in the United States. If you're a Brit, we got the Olympics finally. We had 2008. We've had COVID. We've had Brexit. We've had people trying to burn down hotels full of immigrants. We've lived through maybe the most intense time of like just human activity since Genghis Khan was running wild. And so you look at all of that and you go, who knows what the future holds? But if you look at boxing, and I think this is probably the best episode to start with, because I was going to start with a Joshua Dubois preview, but I can do that later in the week. It plus buys me more time to think about that. But I wanted to talk about where we are with boxing now. We're all boxing fans here, otherwise we wouldn't be listening. But as boxing fans, there are things that we know, and no one talks about them, but we need to get to the bottom of them, right? So, why is America a wasteland for boxing at the moment? Why is the UK becoming a wasteland? Why are broadcasters walking away from boxing? Why is Turkey in boxing? And what's this all going to mean for the sport that we love 5, 10, 15 years from now? We'll touch on some of those and see if we get to the bottom of them. But like, this is more of a, where are we with boxing? And don't worry, it's not going to be loads of numbers. I'm sure I'll get boxing stuff in there. Don't worry about that. But I wanted just to start with where we're at today. And the interesting thing is, if you've listened to me for long enough, right, if you've listened and you've followed my journey, I've said the same thing often, haven't I? The art of boxing is to find a wealthy individual and separate them from their money. And before Turkey, go back to 2018, we found Selen, right? Selen Blavnik. And he wanted to set up a sports broadcaster. He thought there'd be loads of money in sports rights and you could build a company, grow it, flip it. That was his kind of startup idea. And he recruited Eddie Hearn to help him do that because boxing was the one sport that required nothing other than capital. You didn't have to bid for rights. You didn't have to do anything. You could just secure rights. 6 years down the line, we can all agree that hasn't worked. My understanding is DAZN are about 6 to 7 billion in debt. They're at least 300-400 million pounds away from making a profit in any given year. And I'd imagine this year they'll probably lose, I don't know, let's just say somewhere between 400 and 250 million quid. That's what they'll lose. And this is after laying off your middle management, automating so many processes now that, like, I mean, you could run it like Elon's running Twitter. I know people say, oh, you don't know anyone in DAZN. I promise you, if you drink anywhere within Hammersmith or Shepherd's Bush, you drink with DAZN employees. Morale is low. They bring people in on gigs. It's very, very short-termist there. But they understand that they've overpaid for things. And Selen is in two minds. Do you step away now and go, we haven't made this work? Or do you say, right, we're going to outlast the other broadcasters who are going to struggle and then hoover up their assets at a discount? That's really the strategic choice that's happening at the moment. If you go back to when I talked about their CEO, Shay Segev, his aim was to make all the ancillaries a profitable revenue stream for DAZN. Betting, merchandise, fan engagement, those sorts of things, right? The things you kind of buy on the side, but that's taking longer to work than people thought. So DAZN's in a bit of a hole because it's not sustainable and it might never become profitable the way things are going. But if they last it out, they can outlast most of the other mainline broadcasters. So there was a meeting, right? There was a meeting. And at that meeting, Hearn was told, we're going to keep tightening budgets. We are not putting on Joshua Wembley shows. That's what Eddie Hearn was told. That's why you never heard anyone talking about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You never heard it. That's why you don't talk. That's why if you notice, Eddie's not talking about building anyone else up to Joshua's level. DAZN don't have the balance sheet. The Hearns don't want to carry on their balance sheet because they understand with people using things like Fire Sticks now, it's very, very hard to guarantee your revenue. So there was a conversation that was had. Right? And it wasn't just Eddie, by the way. Barry was in on this as well. And between them, they realized they had to get on that Saudi gravy train by any means necessary. And the adults in the room had a conversation and they asked the question, would Frank Warren be open to collaborating? And then we could present this back to Turkey and the Saudis and say, look, this is a stronger proposition. And that's how you end up with Eddie having this love-in with Frank. Is it real? Nah, because you don't build up a decade of animosity and then it's all just gone, right? But Frank knows it solves a problem because it means Frank can do the Saudi thing and be the main man for Turkey along with all the other guys who are involved in that, but he can keep his commitments to TNT spot on. Example is you get to see guys like Denzel Bentley still boxing on TNT. Right, and that's an acceptable compromise for most fans. If I get to watch Denzel in interesting fights, that's okay, right? And for Hearn, something similar. It means there's a guy that can do Joshua fights. That's the important thing for Hearn. There's a guy that can do Joshua fights. That means Matchroom can still call themselves the best in the business at what they do. And so that's how you end up with that at the top level. But Hearn then had to solve his problem of what do I do at that lower level. And if you notice, he's kind of abandoned the UK. He's got specific targeted shows, but he's really got a lot more energy in the United States, gambling that he can enter states that don't have a traditional boxing footprint and bring the Matchroom model there. Create a Matchroom experience and people will love it. And if it works for him, that's fantastic, but they're very low-cost shows to put on. And DAZN doesn't mind that because it gives them a footprint in America and credibility in the States, right? Brand visibility. And that's kind of what Hearn's there for. Hearn is essentially free marketing, right? Yes, you get Matchroom, but you get him. And he will mention DAZN in every interview. So what you have with DAZN at the moment is a company that says we don't know what to do. Like, the model we thought would work isn't working. Their mainline promoter, Eddie Hearn, is realizing that he's reached the limits of what he can do. Right? His balance sheet can't sustain his biggest name. His broadcaster's balance sheet refuses to sustain his biggest name, and instead will just buy the rights to his fights. And DAZN, realizing that Matchroom content wasn't sufficient, opened up the platform. So Salita's on there, Golden Boy are on there. In the UK, GBM are on there. The guy out of Essex, TM14, whatever his name is, he'll be on there. And so they've opened up their platform. Maybe something Sky should have done. They've opened up their platform and said, we're just going to have loads of boxing content here. This is where you now come to for boxing. And that's not a bad idea, in my opinion. And the diversity of fighters and shows is good for the hardcore, if not the casual fan. But what they're trying to do is say, look how many hours people are on the app. Look how many days, how many hours. Now we can sell advertising. So now it's about creating a destination that may be boxing, that may be sport in general. And Hearn is a smaller part of that operation now. When people will talk about Hearn being the main man at DAZN, he's moved down that pecking order because that's the game out. And that's why he needs Turkey. And that's why he had to go to Frank on his knees. I don't know how much further it went than him being on his knees, but that's what happened. And as boxing fans, we don't want to get into the back and forth between them as individuals. It's worked for us, right? We've got Joshua versus Dubois September 21st, and that's the fight we'd have paid to see regardless. What's really sad is there's no UK entity that was willing to carry that on their balance sheet because they don't believe you'd recoup the money on a pay-per-view, because they know this country well, right? We're all struggling at the moment. So now if you turn 90 degrees and you look at the people who used to put those shows on, what's happening with Sky? I think Sky and TNT have similar challenges, and it's that the model doesn't work anymore, right? In this economic climate, both BT and Sky have overpaid for football rights. But they've done that because the alternative is worse. That Amazon could swoop in and just buy all the rights, and all of a sudden you're a sports broadcaster with nothing. And you've been charging people all this money. And most people will just cut the cord. The minute Sky don't have football, people cut the cord. The minute BT don't have football, they'll cut the cord. We're not hanging around to watch top 14 rugby. We're not hanging around to watch Super League netball. We're just not. So they understand that. And so they've massively overpaid. And they've overpaid at a time when there's no customer growth, there's no revenue growth, there's no advertising growth. So they're not growing anywhere else. Like, they can only grow through price increases. And when you increase prices, people hand the keys back and go, I can't make this work. And so those conversations were happening. We can't do big shows on our balance sheet, Frank. We can't do big shows on our balance sheet, Ben. We could do pay-per-views. If you can get us a pay-per-view fight, that makes sense. Brooke Khan was an example. Then yeah, we can do that, absolutely. Because we know how that model works and we know how to mobilize for that. But these transactional shows, we're having to cut our costs. So this is going to be harder. We're going to have to push guys quicker. And so that's what made the Okoli and the Boatsi signings illogical for Sky. And I'm not saying that those aren't good boxers and they don't deserve money. I'm just saying from a balance sheet perspective, that made no sense because those guys are now sat on a balance sheet and you've got to go and monetize them. That's why you see Josh fighting Willie Hutchinson in Saudi. That money is going to come back. So Sky don't have the money to put on good shows. So when people say, why are the Sky shows worse than they used to be? The budgets are smaller. The budgets are smaller because fans are less interested in boxing. The average age goes up every year because young kids aren't really into it. And the kids who are watching Misfits anyway, which is on DAZN. DAZN aren't stupid. They want to be the home of boxing, so they've got it. Sky had the opportunity to have Misfits, and people said, thanks, but no thanks. They're regretting that now, by the way. So Sky have got this problem that we paid so much for the Premier League that there's no way we can be putting on massive Wembley shows. We don't have the bandwidth, the spare capacity for it. And that's why you're seeing shows happen at Crystal Palace. That's why you're seeing shows happen at, Bournemouth Stadium, because it's easier to do that way. The clubs are like, we'll take the additional revenue. Why not? And that's why you're seeing Sky start building hometown heroes in the hope that you get something. The Callum Simpson fight's an example. If we can build someone in Barnsley, a non-traditional boxing market, we can do 7,000 to 10,000 tickets here every fight. And there's a spreadsheet where that probably makes sense. And you start to look at Ben Whittaker. Can Ben Whittaker do the same in Wolverhampton? Probably. And so you're going to start looking at local lads and lasses carrying the franchise going forward with Sky. And that's going to be their model. This is how we're going to make our money back. But it's going to be a hard slog. So don't expect the quality of fights on Sky to improve. You're going to see, and it'll be the same on TNT, when someone like Ben Whittaker gets to that level where he's fringe world or fighting for a world title, it will be on someone else's ticket. Someone else will pay for that. And that's a real shame because it means that we're not developing fighters anymore. Well, let me rephrase it. We're not developing them on TV. And so guys aren't going to always see, the next best thing come through. And if you notice on Sky, there's no one you're getting excited about because whether it's Sky, whether it's Boxer, no one can decide whether you want to build for the future or you want to execute today. And that's why you've had the muddled thinking around signings. Whereas if we jump over to TNT, Frank's been very clear. If you're a young kid and you've been winning stuff and you've been making noise as an amateur, we're going to sign you. And you're going to go down one of two options. If you're Moses Atalma, as blue chip as they come, you're going to jump in with Francis. If you're not quite Moses Atalma, but you're really, really good, and you're seeing it with Masood Abdullah, for example, you're going to jump in with Warren Boxing Management, build yourself up. We're going to get you to, a level where we're confident you're a TV star, put you on there. And you see that now, right? On the TNT shows, like I said, Bentley Dignam, Bentley versus Asaze, domestic scraps on TNT Sport. That's what you're going to get. But as Denzel's ranking rises, you'll start to see him jump towards those Saudi shows. Now, does he fight Tyler Denny next, and does that happen on a Saudi show? I don't know. Maybe he fights Heaney next in his revenge tour, and then that happens on TNT with the promise that the winner gets to fight in Saudi. These are the incentives people are working to. Now, that didn't used to be the case. Before, you just wanted to be on a pay-per-view in Britain on BT Sport or on Sky. So, if we look at our three main broadcasters, these are the problems, right? DAZN struggling on their own. Sky through the parent Comcast, and TNT through the parent, I think it's Warner. Discovery and Warner, we should say. Those Americans are in financial trouble. They've either lost rights or they've overpaid for rights. And what they're now saying is this model doesn't work. That's the feeling. The model doesn't work. And they don't know what to do. So if you look at like Warner Brothers as an example, you're looking at a company that is so cheap it's prime for a takeover. And if you took it over, what's the first thing you're going to get rid of? Sport. Because you're like, well, if I get rid of sport, I'm going to lose this many people, right? But I'm still going to have this many people. And the people who watch TV the most, the longest, the people who are more susceptible to advertising are women. Most people want TV shows that bring women to the table. And a good example of that would be things like Love and Hip Hop Miami or Real Housewives of Orange County. Why? Women love watching those sorts of things. Same with Love Island. And you can sell advertising at a premium. Why? Because you know how many people are going to watch and you pretty much know the demographics. So that macro level, that's what people are looking for. That's where your subscription growth is going to come from. Because men just buy sport. And once we've got sport, that's kind of it. You're not going to really grow that user base much more than that. And so there'll be a slow retreat from overpricing sports assets and wanting to come back to the table with a more reasonable proposition, right? And you're going to see this across the board, by the way. You're going to see this in boxing, and it's going to manifest itself like this. And I do not be surprised if the deal that Joshua has means that people get a piece of everything he generates in boxing. Not the Under Armour deal, not the Land Rover deal, none of that. But if Joshua's on a 60 million purse, DAZN will be getting a slice of that. Matchroom will be getting a slice of that. That's how it's going to work, because it's like we need to share in the upside and the downside. The days of promoters and broadcasters taking all the loss, not worth it. And that's why Joshua was given that equity deal in DAZN. For that exact reason. It's like you've got a share in the upside and the downside. If there's loads of upside, you're going to be a millionaire many times over. If there's downside, we're all going to take a haircut. And so from a broadcasting perspective, that's what you're going to see. You're going to have all of your broadcasters saying low-cost shows, domestic shows, and some foreign shows, right? And that's why you're seeing Frank start to sign American fighters. But these will all be low-cost shows that will just be enough to help build fighters and get people interested. And then the payoff shows, the blow-off ones, will be those that happen under the Saudi ticket for as long as that lasts. And when it's not Saudi, it'll be somebody else, because there's always someone that wants to use boxing as a means of promotion and advancement. Now, if we zero in on Turkey, let's now look. The man has played a blinder, because he offered promoters everything they wanted, and he said, I will put shows on my balance sheet And all you guys have to do is provide fighters and you get a cut. And Hearn's like, perfect. Yeah. Money for doing not that much. Far less stress, right? Far less stress involved. And he did that for long enough that he got people hooked on that model, and it eliminated all competition. And then Turkey said, I've got to start pricing these things sensibly, because I have to show my paymasters that I'm a safe pair of hands to run a multi-billion-dollar budget. Now, you see, most people will be sat there thinking, yeah, Joshua's going to make 100 million. Like, I remember when Fury fought Usyk and people were talking about the numbers involved in that. People were like, yeah, Fury's going to make 100 mil, Usyk's going to make 70. And the numbers were nowhere near that, by the way. They never are, to be honest with you, because that wouldn't make any sense. And so when people do all these estimates on Sports Illustrated and stuff, it's not based on fact. Both men made a lot less than that. And other people would have had to take cuts out of that whole event as well. The Saudis are shrewd. They're smart. They know what value is, right? They paid 300 million for Newcastle. They say Bowley paid 4 billion for Chelsea. You'd be hard pressed to convince me that economically Chelsea's 10 times bigger than Newcastle. I'm not buying that. And so you see the Saudis will do a deal when the deal makes sense. You're seeing it now in the Saudi League, right? The Premier League thought it could get rid of its offcuts to Saudi. And the Saudis were like, no. Napoli found this out with Victor Osimhen. They said, we want 5 million extra. Saudi said, we don't want to do the deal anymore. Now Victor Osimhen is at Galatasaray. I don't think that's great for his career. And on reflection, if you were going to loan him out like that, why not? There you go. That's what greed does to you. And the Saudis know this because they've had years of, being treated like the ugly stepkid. But what they do offer is what the Vegas fights used to offer before America fell out of love with boxing. So Turkey offers that Vegas level payday, nothing higher, just that Vegas level payday where you go, okay, if I go to Vegas, this is a good way to cash out. And that's the Saudi model. If the fights make sense, we'll do them. And that's why you'll see Joshua Dubois will sit on their balance sheet and they'll be paid fairly. They'll be paid more than they would have done anywhere else, right? Hearn couldn't give them the money they're earning now. Frank couldn't give them the money they're earning now. Just couldn't. And then you roll straight into Beterbiev versus Bivol, who will also be paid fairly. And then nominally in December, you've got Fury Usyk too, who both men will be paid reasonably well, depending on how big the fight is. But that fight's not going to be as big as the first one because the first one's pretty decisive. If it happens, by the way. So what Turkey's done is he's got people hooked on his money, and now he's dictating his terms. And he said it's on me now to commercialize these operations. And that's why you're seeing DAZN licensing, Sky licensing, whoever, right? And he's also diversified his supplier base. So he's not just taking guys off Frank because that gave him too much risk. And it can't just be Frank and Eddie, that's too much risk. He's got all the promoters involved now. And that means they've all got to compete with each other to present compelling fights. This is very, very, very smart by Turkey, because now that he's kind of offered this kind of panel that says, look, in any given Riyadh season, I have this many slots. If the fights don't make sense, they're not going on there. And promoters are having to put their good guys on there. Opetaya's boxing on there. Italma's boxing on there. Cody's boxing on there. Crawford's boxing on there. Everyone's having to put their best foot forward. But he's still lacking the crown jewels. And until Turkey gets Canelo and Floyd on his platform, we won't say he's completed boxing. And he knows that. But the question is, does he want to pay the money to get Floyd on there? Because if he won't pay for Floyd, he definitely won't overpay for Joshua. We can work that out, right? And so that's your boxing broadcast landscape. You've got Turkey at the top, cherry picking the best from each promoter, broadcaster, however you want to slice it. And he's just hoovering them up and using them, but compensating everyone fairly for their use, right? And then he gets his geopolitical objectives out of that too. You've got the American-owned broadcasters, Sky and TNT, going, we can't afford this because we're getting killed at home and you guys aren't showing us enough growth where you are to justify spending money on something like boxing. So if you can do it on the cheap, awesome. If you can't do it on the cheap, wrap that up. And then you've got DAZN, and DAZN have now said, we're going to create our own panel. We can't just be beholden to Matchroom and Golden Boy. Let's start broadening our profile, and that should mean that we get more eyes on our platform for longer. Not many, but it's a start, and it's a way of growing maybe not your subscriber base, but your engagement base without having to buy additional sports. And that's going to be the important thing. Because what DAZN have now realized is a lot of these fringe sports like korfball don't move numbers. Like, it's stuff that you'll watch if you already have a subscription, but you're not going to subscribe to watch volleyball or korfball or lacrosse. You're just not. You know, like those governing bodies have tried to monetize their product. It doesn't work. So that's your broadcast landscape. It's dark out there, okay? It's dark, right? It's dark. So when you watch shows and you go, this isn't very good, that's why. There isn't the money, and a lot of the talent you're familiar with is getting old just like you are. And so we're just in that kind of boxing recession now, and Turkey's softening the blow, but he's not going to be there forever, if we're being honest. He's just not. Because at some point, you don't want to rent your assets, you want to own them. And does he really want to own boxing? I'd argue that he doesn't, because it comes with headaches you don't need. But when you rent, I can take it, I can hand it back. Which is good in terms of doing business, but not great in terms of maximizing revenue. And actually, on a side note, you're going to see this with the Premier League. At some point, the Premier League is going to say, we might just need to broadcast our games ourselves. That's the best way to make sure that all the profit that exists goes to us. And I can see the Premier League doing that in the next decade. And that's really what the Super League was all about. The European Super League was about that Super League owning everything. And that's how you got the money, that's how you got the growth, cutting the broadcasters out. In the next decade, the people who own the sport will monetize the sport. Now, does Turkey want to own the sport? I'd argue not. Because once you own it, then you'll see all the problems. You know, there's a reason why Don King has a reputation. He does. He had to be a hard taskmaster, because once you make boxers comfortable, they don't want to work anymore. But here's one area where I am optimistic, though. The small hall shows. I think that's the light at the end of the tunnel. And the reason is there's more of a need to bring people up, right? We now need to be dynamic, pull kids up from the small hall scene onto TV, push some of the TV guys down onto the small hall scene if they've taken a loss, for example. So it's a lot more dynamic now. So you're seeing kids who have bubbled up the small hall scene, Echo Esserman. We saw Stanley Stannard on Sky, Lee Cutler on Sky. Derek Osaze, they brought up from the small hall scene to box again. We've seen it with Brad Pauls, like that might be the shining example. Brad Pauls grinding away on the small hall scene for ages. Now look at him, British champion, deservedly so. We've seen it with Linus. So that distinction between televised and non-televised has shrunk because the bar for televised has come down a bit. So if you are a Steve Goodwin, you're now looking at that going, have I got some gems I could get on TV, and how do I build those up? If you're Izzy at GBM, you're thinking the same thing. Yes, you've got the DAZN platform, but I'm still going to put Izzy in that small hall scene because he doesn't have that kind of main line. We're not going to be there on a Saturday 10 o'clock for their main event. As much as I'd love to, they're not quite where your likes of Boxer are yet, but they'll get there. They're realizing that this game's a lot more expensive than it looks. Once people know how much money you've got to play with, they know how to inflate their costs accordingly. And then you've got Carl Greaves, who's still building great fighters up in the East Midlands, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire. He's still doing his thing. You might see Dennis pop up again. And then you've got Pat Barrett doing his thing, Joe G's putting on his shows. And all of a sudden, everyone's realized that I can get my kids on TV. If I can get them the right kind of profile, show that they sell tickets, that the people are interested in them. Like I said, building local heroes. And then they will bubble up and bubble through. Tyler Denny's another example of that. And actually, one of the best examples we didn't talk about is Chris Billum Smith. The man's basically anchored South Coast boxing now. And that's from a kid from Bournemouth. And so all this stuff's interesting now, because now there's a real interest in small hall boxing. You're going to see people on small hall shows you've seen on TV, and you're going to see people on TV you've seen on small hall shows. So for boxing fans, that's really good. And what's also good is that geographical dispersion. Like, it's not just London anymore, right? Midlands, they've got their stars. The East Midlands have got their stars. Yorkshire's got its stars. Lancashire, Manchester, Liverpool, wherever, Blackpool, they've got their stars. Now we've got stars on the South Coast. And so it's becoming like it used to be, where, you know, it's a British boxing scene. And so if you are a kid from Bournemouth, if you box for, I don't know, Parkstone, if you box for Golden Ring, wherever, you can see a pathway to TV now. I think that's going to be really good. So there's stuff to be optimistic about, but we all need to be realistic, just like we are with our budgets. Right? We're all looking at our budgets right now, aren't we, and saying, what can I afford, what can't I afford? And we're making compromises. Maybe before we might not have got Asda's own mayonnaise, but we're like, well, it tastes like it's from the same factory as Heinz, with just a little less salt. I'll take that. Instead of Heinz ketchup, I might use normal ketchup. You might be buying name brand brandy, vodka, cider, whatever it is. We're all doing that because, like the broadcasters, our costs have grown, but our money hasn't. And so when you get annoyed at the quality of shows in the next 12 months, just remember this episode and go, let me have a bit of sympathy for these guys, because they're trying the best they can. When fighters want to be paid more, broadcasters want to spend less, promoters want to make more, right? And it's very hard to balance all of these competing interests. But what I really wanted to tackle was, what's happened to America? If you go down the weight classes, heavyweight, no Americans of note right now. After Jared Anderson lost to Bacoli, there are no Americans where you're like, I want to see what he does. There are none at cruiserweight, but traditionally that's not an American weight class. Maybe they can make that popular again. On a side note, let's ignore Bridgerweight for now until it matures a bit. Light heavyweight, no Americans of note. Super mid, no Americans of note unless one of the Charlos moves up. And then you get to middleweight and maybe there's Jamal Charlo, but what has he really done recently? Not much. It's not till you get to 154, Crawford, etc. Crawford, smaller Charlo, and you can't put Tony Harris in there anymore. And they're in the mix, but there are also guys like Tim Tszyu and so forth. So big American fighters don't really exist anymore. And I've been racking my brain as to why. And I think sometimes boxing has to absorb the effects of wider society. And I think when you incarcerate more people across all cultures, by the way, right? When you incarcerate more people, and it's normally men that get incarcerated, there's nobody taking young boys to boxing gyms or MMA gyms or judo. No one's doing that because I don't think mums have the same understanding of the value of a boxing gym. I think it's changing now as women become more active. But that whole process of dads taking their sons to a boxing gym to say, look, you need to learn discipline, control, and all these sorts of things. It's harder when your standard demographic are mostly incarcerated or absent fathers. And, you know, that's a wider conversation for another time. And it seems that America's now living with the consequences of a lack of paternal intervention in a child's life. Because in the old days, that's how it worked. Look, I've been in boxing long enough to remember dads bringing kids to the gym. It doesn't happen anymore. You get a lot of kids who just walk in. They might walk in because their mate's there. That seems to be the way that it's going now, which is a shame, by the way, because that father-son relationship, like when the kid wants to please the dad, is normally when they do their best work. And that's where they get their first support from. So I watch kids box now. There's no dad there. Granddad might show up to watch, but there isn't a dad who's bringing his mates to come see my boy box like it used to be. And you're seeing this in America. kids aren't walking into boxing gyms. You look at any video of a boxing gym in America and look at the people training. It's all kind of PTs and actors and actresses and massage therapists, and accountants, not kids who want to make it. Those kids aren't really there in the numbers they used to be. And I always go back to what Greg Hackett said in our first interview. And he said, in Philadelphia, you didn't walk into a boxing gym until you had a few street fights, because people needed to know that you could handle yourself. And that's in the decline. I don't know how you fix this, by the way, because these are social problems. They're not boxing problems, but boxing tends to see the manifestation of that. So when there are no fathers present, these kids are influenced by other people. So if you're a 6'8" kid and you're not coordinated enough to bounce a basketball, and you're not rapid enough to be an offensive lineman in football, and you can't swing a bat, you're just turning to the streets now. You're not boxing. You're not doing MMA. You're just turning to the streets, because those are the male figures you get to see. And that's the real shame. And that's why when people say black fighters aren't as good as they used to be, I'm like, they probably are. We just don't have the numbers. We're not getting the creme de la creme like we might have done once upon a time. There's a time when LeBron James might have boxed, but then he's so good at basketball, you wonder, would he really? So maybe pick someone else, Draymond Green. But, there are a lot of people in other sports that in another world would have taken up boxing. But the American model is so attuned to getting kids scholarships that you focus your high school career on that scholarship, because that's how you change your life. Now, is there an argument to say that boxing should be a university sport in America? Yes. But can you imagine the pay you'd have to go through to get that approved? I'd like the idea of that, because isn't that what Inoue is a product of? Like in Japan, boxing is a university sport. They get their boxers through the university system. And that's why, if you notice, they're all of a similar standard, because they all go through the same kind of school of hard knocks. I'd like to see that in the UK, actually, if we had boxing as a proper university sport. I wonder what that would do. And then, because you'd need the kind of the flow down as well. So kids would have to be in the gym before they went to university. So they'd start a lot younger. But if we did that in America, and you got a college scholarship to do that, I think you change the demographics of boxers. I think you'd suddenly see those big lumps coming back, because they'd be like, well, I'm not going to make it at football, but I'm a big guy, I'm strong, I'm explosive. Let me try boxing. And we'll get back to that. But I'd like to see America come back, because I think boxing's commercial future will forever be tied up with how it's perceived in America. When there are American stars in boxing, you have world stars. And I think maybe that's why, as much as we praise Joshua and we respect what he's achieved, he's never been an American star, because when he fought in America, a rather short Mexican beat him up. But look, what I'd like to do now is just wrap up with the kind of weird State of the Union and just blast through the top 5, maybe the top 25 actually. Let's do the top 25 of BoxRec and just see what we expect from them this year, this season, however you want to call it, the next 12 months. And God, I've never read off a screen before while I record, so this is going to be interesting. So if it's a bit clunky, bear with me. I don't normally like doing this, but sometimes you got to live in the moment. Because I think BoxRec number 1 right now is Naoya Inoue, who's just beaten TJ Doheny. Is that how I say it? The Irish people correct me. He punched the life out of him. And here's the thing. His punches sounded completely different to TJ's. Completely different. It didn't look like they were like the same league, the same weight class. And I don't know what it is with Inoue. Like, I'm trying not to say it's drugs, but when you see loads of the Japanese fighters in the BoxRec top 25 out of nowhere, you're like, what's going on there? But even so, he has different punch mechanics. So I'm prepared to say he's just figured out a way to engage more muscles in his midsection than other boxers do. Because you can see that there's a real concerted effort when he goes for the power punches, that he generates a lot of torque. And so I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. Another dominant performance. He'll definitely go up to featherweight because nothing else makes sense at super bantam now. So he'll go up to featherweight. Depending on what he does at featherweight, do you then push him up to super feather? Time will tell, but I don't see him sitting around at 122 pounds because he doesn't need to. He can do a lot of damage at 126, enhance his reputation. And I'm sure the guys at 122 will go up there for the payday anyway. So he'll have another incredible year. I don't see him losing. I don't see him losing anytime soon. The second on that list is Gervonta Davis. What do you do if you tank? Like, your real options, in my opinion, are Loma at 135. If you go up to 140, it's Haney or Garcia. I think he beats Haney, and I think he beats Garcia. So he's on a hiding to nothing. The question is, would Teo come down to 140? Because he's got ambitions of fighting at 147. He's been chasing Crawford. So would he fight Tank at 140? And if so, what would that fight look like? But I think Tank will have a couple of filler fights in the next 12 months, and he'll have one of those names on his record by the end of the season, I think. I don't know if it's going to be Loma or Haney. It'll be one of those two that I can see him doing that with. Now, whether he does it on a Saudi show is a different matter, but he doesn't need to. Economically, Tank's one of the few Americans that can generate real money in the United States, so he doesn't have to. Terence Crawford's in a different boat, though. It's almost like he's run out of moves. The Canelo fight was talked about so much that it doesn't really make sense. Like, if I'm Crawford right now, my plan is I fight Jamal Charlo at 154, I fight Jamal Charlo at 160 in the next 12 months, and then I'm done, right? And he can say, look, these guys have been disrespecting me a long time. I just want you to sort this out, wrap it up, and get out. I don't see, the Canelo fight, Canelo's too big, he's too strong, and he's too skillful for Crawford to put that much of a dent in him. So I wouldn't want to see that just for my love of Crawford, and I'd like to see him walk out with dignity. But I think if Crawford fought the two Charlo brothers, that'd be a decent end to his career, because Jamel was undisputed at 154, and Jamal, I'm sure he was unified at 160. I might be wrong on that, but he's definitely unified at one of those weight classes, maybe 154. Fourth on that list is Dmitry Bivol. I see him losing to Beterbiev without jeopardizing any analysis to do in the future. I think Beterbiev's busier than any fighter Bivol's been in with before. I think he hits harder. I think Beterbiev loves to push people back. Bivol hates boxing going back. And people talk about, but look at all the punches Bivol throws. But people forget Beterbiev came up in the Soviet style and was still champion in Russia. Pretty dominant champion in Russia at 81 and 91. So I don't think Bivol's going to present anything to him that he's not prepared for. And on a side note, really happy to see Craig Richards out there in camp with Beterbiev getting some good work in. You're never too late to challenge yourself. So hopefully Craig comes back with a bit more insight. Like, hopefully he's going to learn. I should voice note him after this. He should learn how devastating a high work rate is, because that's what Beterbiev is going to give him. Number 5 is Canelo. What does Canelo do? What's Canelo's exit at this point? He's going to fight Berlanga soon. Okay, we're all right with that. But at this point, it's just money fights. I can see him fighting Eubank Jr. because it would tick the UK box. And if Turkey's going to do a September fight in the UK next year, why wouldn't you have Canelo and Eubank Jr. headlining that? I think that would do stupid numbers, because Brits come out when they know that they're in the presence of a legend. So I'd like to see that. If not that, would he rematch Bivol if Bivol loses to Beterbiev? Probably. And then, he could see how it's done. So I think we're closer to the end of Canelo than we think we are. I can see him saying 18 more months and I'm done. After Beterbiev, I think if he gets to undisputed, what else is there to do at 175? Does he go up to cruiserweight and go looking for challenges at cruiserweight? Would he would he call Usyk out at cruiserweight and say, come on, man, let's do it one more time? And would that be a commercially viable fight for two people who don't really speak a lot of English? I don't know. Also worth considering the geopolitical context of a Russian fighting a Ukrainian as well. So do you really want to do that when the situation is so charged? But if Beterbiev does beat Dmitry Bivol, and I think it's likely, I just think, like I said, the work rate's suffocating. If he does, he's earned the right to determine his exit path. He might just decide to retire. Maybe the body's telling him, you can't do this anymore. Number 7, Junta Nakatana, another one of the small Japanese guys. I think he's bantam. Will these Japanese guys ever fight each other? I don't know, but they all seem to be quite devastating punches. Like, he might move up and fight a guy like Liam Davis or Dennis McCann for the payday. But, like, yeah, someone's got to explain the Japanese boxing miracle to me, because I'm a bit like, wow, where does this come from? Number 8 is David Benavidez. Just a confusing career. I think he may as well make his home at 175 now. Forget about Canelo. Just move beyond Canelo. If Canelo is going to fight him, they'll find a catchweight to do it. But he should be building his own legacy now. At a time when we're kind of at the tail end of Beterbiev, and I think we're going to start seeing vulnerabilities in Bivol. This is Benavidez's time. If he's really the guy that he says he is, make your mark at 175. Shakur Stevenson, like a better Tevin Farmer, isn't he? I think Hearn's going to find out pretty quickly that there's not much you can do with Shakur. Yes, he'll talk about, Shakur should fight Tank Davis. DAZN don't have the money to make that happen. I don't think there's a commercial appeal for that to happen. And I don't think Turkey would want that to happen. So who's going to take the fight on their balance sheet? No one. And that kind of leaves Shakur in an odd place where he might get Loma, he might get Haney, he might get Garcia, but those guys are no mugs. I don't know if he's ready for those guys yet. But at some point, he's got to test himself because he has been coasting for a while. If we go to number 10, we got Boots Ennis. I feel really sorry for him because he's arrived at the welterweight division when there's no one of interest there. And I don't want the hardcores giving me names of people that the public haven't heard of and go, oh, he should fight this guy. No. Crawford's gone. Spence went fight at 147. Garcia went fight at 147. Porter's gone. Khan's gone. Brooks gone. All the money men in that division have gone. And so it's just his to own. But what is there for him there? Probably nothing. So he's going to have to go up to 154 at some point. By the time he does that, that'll be a wasteland. It'll be a wasteland too. He might be that guy who, at the end of his career, we say he didn't really fight anyone, but we know he was good. A bit like Triple G pre-Canelo. Devin Haney, I don't think Devin Haney's recovered from what happened with Ryan Garcia. So he'll have a tune-up fight. No, he'll have a gimme, build his confidence back. I think he rematches Ryan Garcia tail end of next year. Let Garcia come off his ban, get sharp again, and those two will fight again. That'll be a big fight because like they're genuine rivals now. So that's the fight the public should be looking out for tail end of next year, maybe early 2026. William Cepeda, I don't know. What do you do if you're Cepeda? Tank? I don't think Tank. I don't see that happening. You know, as long as Canelo owns Cinco de Mayo, it doesn't really make sense economically. But viable and valuable argument. Guy's an absolute nightmare to deal with. Do you put him in with Shakur? That's the real question. And you know, if so, how does Shakur fare? Because remember, Zepeda's a southpaw. Maxie Hughes found this out and how devastating a southpaw he is as well. He's the sleeper for me. Boxing-wise, I think he's the sleeper. He's that guy who you're going to see a lot more kind of social media chatter around him in the next 12 months. He just seems primed for a really big year. 13 is Bam Rodriguez. What do you do if you're Bam? Do you move up? You've kind of shown you're the guy, but do you then start accumulating those kind of legacy names at Superfly? So do you want to be jumping in with Chocolatito, Shishakat, Sorunga Vasai. Do you want to jump in with those guys? Or do you want to move up? Do you want to move up and maybe take on some of the Japanese monsters? Because he looks like he could do it. But he's one of those guys as well who's earned the right to determine his own path. So kudos to him for that. Usyk. I said it many times. I don't see Usyk fighting Fury in December. Maybe he fights Fury in March. And if he does fight Fury in March, that's when you'll see Conor Benn come back. I can guarantee it. Conor Benn will come back then. He'll have a tune-up, and then we'll be talking about the Eubank fight. I think, like, I was on Porky's the other day, and I said this. I don't rate anything Usyk did at cruiserweight, but I rate everything he did at heavyweight. The cruiserweight, just because I never rated those guys anyway. Like, if Usyk wasn't there, I would have told you I don't rate any of these guys. Whereas at heavyweight, he's beaten guys that we rated. And I really respect his heavyweight run, and so he's justifiably on the pound-for-pound list because of that. But I see him fighting Fury next year. I see him maybe giving Joshua one more, or if Dubois wins, one more, and then calling it a day. What does he need to be, putting his body through this again? He'd have made his money. I assume he's not living in Ukraine, so he's got a family that's safe and so forth. What do you need to do at that point, really? And that brings us on to Anthony Joshua, number 15. Crossroads. If he beats Dubois, then there can be no more filler opponents. Then it's just legacy fights. Then it's guys like Fury, Usyk, and you wrap it up. If he loses to Dubois, and it's not 50-50. I think the odds are 60-40 in Joshua's favor just because he's been there before at that level. If he loses to Daniel Dubois, what does he do? Does he just have fights that generate a ton of cash? So do you just end up going, right, I'll fight Joyce, I'll fight Zhang, I'll fight Fury, and I'm done? Or do you just go, maybe I don't have it anymore? He doesn't need the money. But he loves boxing. The feedback I get from the guys in the Ben Davison Performance Centers, AJ loves boxing. So even if he lost, he wouldn't stop boxing, and no one should tell him to stop, I don't think. He'd still get stuck in. But the world would see Anthony Joshua differently. And then we'd all be revisionists about his career if he lost to Dubois. But we'll talk about that more when we do the preview. The preview will happen, by the way, I guarantee that. After Joshua, we look at Vasyl Lomachenko at 16. He needs the biggest fights he can get. So in Loma's shoes, I'm fighting Tank, I'm fighting Shakur, and I'm done. Like, he has nothing left to prove not to another soul on this planet. He came, he saw, he conquered, he impressed us. As much as we may not think he's as great as others say he is, he's a special fighter. Special fighter, and I know he's special because he was able to win doing stuff that you would never have thought would make sense. And they're always the ones you look at. Kind of like Prince Nassim. You're successful by violating most of boxing's conventional wisdom. So would like to see him have two more fights, and then, him and Usyk just retire. And, that's probably the end of that kind of golden era of Ukrainian boxing. Teo Lopez, I don't know. There's nothing there at 147. Maybe Boots at a push, but Boots might be too big, too strong at this point in time. Or you stay at 140, and you've got Garcia, you've got Tank if he wants to move up, you got Haney, you got Cepeda if he wants to move up, and you got the guys with the belts, man. You might even have to jump in with like a Barroso, for example. So I think there are options for him, but would just like to see him have some momentum because he seems to be the best of the bunch. He's definitely the most interesting, but it doesn't feel that way when you look at his career. 18 is Jamal Charlo, inactive, no idea what he's going to do, no idea if he's ever going to box again. I hope he does. I hope he overcomes his demons so he can box again. It'd be a real shame if he doesn't. But until we hear him talk publicly, it's hard to talk about what he would do. 19's a surprise, Christian and Billy, but I think he's super mid, isn't he? Oh my God, like, who wants to jump in with him at super mid? He's punching holes in people. I swear he beat Heffron, like really beat Heffron up. What does he do? Like, has he earned the right to fight Canelo? I don't know. It doesn't feel like he has. It feels like he needs a signature win like that. Like if you brought Billy Joe back, would he fight in Billy? Probably not. Well, why would you? Do you put Billy in with someone like Jaime Munguia? Is Munguia 168? I think he is. Yeah. So do those two fight each other? You know, because on Boxrec they're 19 and 20. So do those two fight each other? The winner gets Canelo? That would make sense. But yeah, I think in Billy's a hard night's work for a lot of people. Maybe not Canelo because he's been there before, but that's what I would say. And then 21's Kenshiro Taraji, I should say. Another one of the Japanese small guys. Well, what do you do with him? Do you just move him up to flyweight, super fly? Does he fight Bam Rodriguez? I don't know, but let's get these Japanese small guys fighting outside of Japan and, you know, build their profile and build their star. 22, Hamza Shiraz. You know what? I don't know what you do with Hamza Shiraz. I don't. Like, I'm sat here thinking, if he wins, fight for a world title, yes, but there's no one really of note at world level. So you're looking at Janibek, just because we can say, look, this is what Janibek did to Denzel. Let's see what Hamza can do to Janibek. But that's also a risky fight for Hamza Shiraz because you're fighting a southpaw. He has a great sense of timing, great long punches, but it would cement him at that level. At this point, you want to see Hamza Shiraz do well because he's handled his career the right way. You know, clearly America's home for him. Like, you know, when the ring canvas has your initials on it, you know that that's your base now for a long time. So I wish him all the best. He boxes on the 21st, so let's see what he does. Yeah. Would like to see him fight Denzel at some point, but I think Denzel needs a couple more wins to call that one out. But that would be a good fight down the line. 23, Takuma Inoue, small Japanese guy again. I would just put them in that kind of Bam, Sonny Edwards camp of, do they all just fight each other? Because I think there's money in these guys fighting, because like these all feel like they'd be wars. Ryan Garcia at 24. Not sure how, by the way, but okay. I'd just like to see him come back. Let him come back and fight Haney. Just let all these guys get the fights done. It looked like they were about to do that. Like we were going to have our new Four Kings era. So yeah. Ryan will be back next year, April next year. So he'll probably fight May next year and then rematch Haney tail end of that year. And then 25 is Masanori Rikishi, another Japanese miracle fighter at super feather. World's probably his oyster too. Some interesting Brits you could be fighting at 130. But these guys don't tend to leave Japan, so I don't know what would happen there. But I think that's the top 25. No young superstars coming through amongst that list. That's not saying they don't exist, but you know, we're going to be cheering on the same people we cheered on last year. And that's probably a good point to draw a line and say, look, guys, I don't know if the next episode will be the Joshua Dubois preview. I just want to do one, right? And then no one asks me again, please. But at this point, I want to tap out and say have a great day, guys, and take care.